When our kids are young, we make virtually all of their entertainment decisions for them. Yes to this, no to that. But how do we know when to begin to let them make decisions in this area on their own? Hey everyone, Adam Holz here, your host of this week's episode of The Plugged In Show. Thanks for joining us today. Well, setting boundaries is one of the really defining tasks, I think, of raising kids. But as they move into adolescence, we realize we've got parenting decisions to make about how much we ease up on control or how much we keep the reins tight in that area. And today, Jonathan McKee, Paul Asay, and I, hey guys.
Hello.
Hey.
We'll be talking through this important topic, and my guess is maybe sharing some personal stories of times we got it right, or maybe times we look back and we're like, I'm not sure we quite nailed that. And in our second segment, plenty of those, exactly. In our second segment, we'll be talking about a singer who has had a breakthrough year in 2024. Her name is Chapell Roan. You may not know her name yet, but I'm guessing your kids do. And what do we need to know as parents? We'll talk through an overview of this influential new artist. Well, before we dive into today's show, I want to say thanks for joining us each week as we talk about how screens and entertainment potentially influence you and your family. We really love connecting with you, and if you're watching or listening on YouTube this week, be sure to ring that notification bell, like our channel, and make sure to subscribe. And if you've enjoyed our pop culture and technology conversations each week for a while now, we would invite you to consider making a donation to help support the Plugged In Show as we move into the future. It sounds like we should be climbing into a DeLorean, doesn't it?
Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be cool. And while you're clicking, make sure you sign up for our weekly Plugged In e-newsletter too. It's another point of connection with the show each week, as well as highlighting the biggest and best reviews on Plugged In, and you'll get that every Friday. You can sign up today, and you will see a link to do that on the homepage for the show, which of course is thepluggedinshow.com. Well, today, shocker, we're talking about entertainment and families, and it seems like a well that we never quite get all of the water out of, which is good, because that's why we're here, right?
That's why we're here.
I'm not sure that metaphor worked, but there we go. It's out there.
It's there.
I'm not going to retract it. So what's something entertainment related, and it could be music, it could be a video game, it could be a movie, that your parents said, absolutely not, no way, when you were growing up? And I think that we'll have a diverse range of answers here. I'm looking forward to seeing how
you want a list?
How you can give me a list how your parents crushed your dreams when you were a child.
Yeah, it was pretty severe. So mine, I don't quite know why after watching this thing later on. Three's Company. Totally.
You want me to tell you why?
You can tell me why.
No, I'm just going to keep you guessing.
I wasn't allowed to watch it either.
Yeah, it was really forbidden in our house, and there were a lot of things that I couldn't watch.
Nice German word.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
that means forbidden. They sound similar.
In German. I speak German.
So I was not allowed to watch Three's Company. I could watch the shows before it, but after
Love Boat was okay, but Three's Company was right out.
Done.
Love American Style, fine. Love Boat, fine.
Yeah, Love Boat I could watch. I could watch Love Boat. I couldn't watch Charlie's Angels. I couldn't watch Three's Company. And so when I got into college and I could make these decisions on my own, which is an important theme that we're going to be talking about.
Yes,
that's right.
One of the first things I did was watch Three's Company, and I was expecting it to be much racier than it was, and actually much better. It was a really dumb show.
Yeah, all right. Well, we won't tell John Ritter, but he's no longer with us, so it is what it is, I guess.
It is what it is.
Well, I want to circle back when we get into our main conversation about something you said offhandedly that I think actually illustrates one of the things we're going to talk today is when you got into college.
Well, exactly.
And you could make your decisions for yourself. So
that's
let's
key
put
point.
a pin in that and come back to it, because we haven't even really started our conversation yet. In fact, Jonathan, we haven't heard from you yet, other than we know that Three's Company was on your list as well.
Yes, it definitely was on my I can't watch list. But I think when you asked the question, the first thing I definitely thought of was my brother and I had tried to record various albums on tape, because you remember, in our day and age, that's what you did. You'd borrow your friend's album and you'd make a tape of it. right?
Yes.
That's what you do.
Pirating.
And then you know,
That was ancient pirating.
And I borrowed my friend's AC/DC Back in Black.
Yeah.
And it was a hard no. It was, Dad came home.
Don't listen and don't steal it.
Saw that black album cover right there, and it was for sure from the devil. And it was absolutely just nope. Return that one. That was a hard no.
Hard no on AC/DC, which I think that there were a lot of Christian families that were a hard no on AC/DC in the 1980s. And I look back on it now, and it's not that AC/DC doesn't have problems. There are problems all over the place, but I kind of have a little bit of a chuckle about how worked up we got about AC/DC and Ozzy Osbourne and some of the rest of them.
Back when I was a kid, a friend of mine actually bought a Motley Crue album specifically.
Shout at the devil?
So we could, so we could play it backwards. And it didn't make a lick of sense. It didn't do anything.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Anyway.
So I wrote this question, and you guys are going to laugh at this because I didn't really think through my own answer to the question before I wrote it. And my answer is telling as well, because I think that right here we're going to have in our own experience personally as kids, let alone with our kids, a really great diversity of responses. I don't remember my parents ever saying no to anything. In fact, I don't think my parents had much of an idea of what I was doing at all, in part because they were raising two toddlers. I was about 10 years older than my brother and sister, who they had in quick succession, little home wreckers that, I guess you could say they destroyed my life, or maybe they made my life awesome because my parents were so utterly checked out on what I was doing from about age 10 to about age 20 that...
you could do whatever you wanted.
I did.
You could watch Three's Company.
I could. I didn't. But I watched a lot of Knight Rider.
Well, yeah.
But,
I did too. We could talk about
We could talk about
That's
that.
another podcast.
Yes, that would be another podcast for another time. But I think that in retrospect, I had pretty much wide open boundaries, or just a wide open field.
Right. Didn't have boundaries.
There wasn't a boundary.
Right.
And so I think it's interesting, and it'll segue into our conversation about our own experiences. I wonder sometimes as parents, when we're now raising kids and trying to navigate these issues, I think one of two things tends to happen. We either do something pretty similar, or we look at what our parents did and say, man, they totally missed that. I'm going all the way the other direction.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting when I think about your experience and my experience, Adam, is that my parents were pretty strict with what I could watch, what I couldn't watch.
Yeah.
And then you heard when I was able to make my own choices, I made some bad choices. I
Right.
watched a really bad TV sitcom. You made...
yes, you are going to burn for eternity for watching Three's Company.
Three's Company.
You made all your bad choices when you were young because no one had any boundaries. So it doesn't feel like either of those are necessarily the way to go. Right?
No, and let's circle back to that in just a moment, because I have another question I want to ask before we quite get there.
Gotcha.
And it's maybe more of a basic one, right? I mean, I think on one hand, we absolutely want to protect our kids, and it's our responsibility as parents. It's our responsibility as parents to understand there's a world out there with ideas and images that can be incredibly destructive. And frankly, it's another podcast for another time. Again, kids' access to those potentially today is so much easier than it was for us. But I think most of us want our kids to be able to, I hope, make their own decisions for themselves at some point. And so the question becomes, what does that transition look like where we begin to let them make their own choices? So I just want to kind of throw that wide open and go from there. And I think we'll circle back to what you were just talking about. But what do we need to keep in mind as we think about beginning to let our kids make some of those decisions themselves?
Nothing.
I think it's a great question, and I love honestly the existence of the question, because I think some of us, we don't even think that way. We kind of think of, hey, I'm going to raise my kids right. I'm going to teach them the way, and we kind of throw some scriptures in there of like, teach them the way to go, which means make all the decisions for them. And then when they magically turn 18, good luck. And I think it's just even you asking, hey, when do you start letting them make decisions for themselves? I love the premise. Because I think that question alone gets us thinking of, well, what's this look like?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think many of us, when it comes to a lot of things in life, we would think about, take an innocent thing like your child learning to cook. I don't think anybody would be like, well, we're going to wait till they're age 18 to let them learn to cook. I think honestly,
or managing money.
If your 10-year-old showed an interest, you'd be like, hey, this is great. And you'd let them, help you. And then maybe when they're 12 or 13, maybe if they really wanted to, they could cook a meal a week for the family if they wanted to. You'd let them slowly segue into taking ownership of some of these decisions. If your kid wanted to help you in the garage, building projects, working on the car, changing your oil in the driveway, whatever it is, you could start with hand me a wrench, but eventually they might get to the point where they're actually disassembling stuff, doing it themselves. And that's kind of the way it works in most things. And I actually find it funny that we're scared when it comes to entertainment to do the same thing.
Yeah.
We're scared to let them show responsibility, let them learn a little bit for themselves, to where while we're sitting right there with them, if they were to fall, we could help them up and we could give them guidance. So I love the question. I love the fact that we can possibly do this segue of, we know that a toddler at age 2 years old is not going to choose for themselves what to watch on TV. And we know that when they're 18, they can definitely choose everything from themselves. The question is, when is that transition, and what's that look like? Does it start with just handing a wrench? When do we let them start pulling parts off the car?
Paul?
I love your cooking analogy, Jonathan, because you really do. There is a point in time where you have your child, and the main thing you tell them about cooking is don't touch the hot stove.
Right.
Absolutely.
There is definitely a point where you do say no to things.
Yep.
But, and I'm not sure if I've ever really thought about it with this kind of clarity before, what we do here. Part of Plugged In's mission is to protect kids from what they shouldn't see.
We issue a lot of warnings.
Right, exactly. But I think much, much more importantly, we want to help parents teach their kids, to make those decisions, to help them walk through. Because protection is great, but your kids aren't going to be in this walled-off community forever. They're going to go off into the wide, wide world. They're going to buy their own streaming services. They're going to make their own movie choices. It's important to walk them through and to say not only what is sort of on limits, off limits when they're younger, but to say why.
Yeah.
And then eventually sort of say, so what do you think?
Yeah. And I think that even though I have posed the question, when do we let them do this? It's a little bit of a trick question, right? Because I don't think the intent of this conversation is to prescribe the answer.
Right.
There's not a one-size-fits-all answer here.
Yeah, no.
I'll give a two-part example, and one of these things I think I have mentioned before, and I might even be inviting some judgment. My son was almost 17, and he had some friends that were getting together to watch American Psycho, which is one of the more graphic movies, I think, in the last 25 years or so. You name the content, it is in there. And I said, bud, I want to tap the brakes on this. I think that there's so much content here that it's not something I want you to see. And because we have this sort of back and forth dialogue, he was able to accept that. He's like, okay, that makes sense to me. And he didn't pitch a fit. He didn't push back. And within the next couple of weeks, he's like, hey, Dad, some friends of mine and I are going to see Cocaine Bear. And it wasn't, can I do it? He had already bought the tickets. And this is an R-rated movie. And I actually got on Plugged In because my biggest question was, is there a bunch of weird sexual content in there. And there's not. It's about a bear that eats a bag of cocaine and goes on a rampage and kills people. I'm like, okay, is this edifying entertainment for my 17-year-old? Probably not. But it also feels like this is peak 16, 17-year-old premise, right? Yeah, I'm going with my friends to see the movie about the bear that ate cocaine, right? And I'm like, all right, this is not my favorite. It's R-rated, but this is not one I'm going to go to the wall for. And so there was a differentiation in my response based on the content. Yeah. And some people would say, well, he wasn't, 17 yet. He shouldn't be going to an R-rated movie. Okay, fine. You got me. But that was, I think, a fairly recent example of one time, even at that age, I said no. And another time, I'm like, all right. Yeah. I was a 16-year-old kid. We watched horror movies constantly, and just even remembering that part of my growing up and sharing that experience with my friends. So there's judgment calls to be made in that.
There really are. There really are. It's not a very clean process.
No, it's not.
What we're talking about. And you don't find any hard and fast rules. At 13, this is where you do
Cocaine Bear was a hard no at 13.
But, and I think that's why it's so important to have a good relationship and to really, really know your kids and to know what they can handle, to know,
great point,
to know kind of your own level of comfort. It's super important to just the primary thing that we always have to remember when we're having these conversations is it's all about the relationship. Yeah. And if you know your kids well, if you know what they can handle, if you know your own relationship where you can say no to some things, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think even our kids are different. I think there are going to be some milestones kind of along the way, and it's interesting how our discussion in our podcast in this last year has kind of earmarked some of those milestones that a lot of experts are starting to say, like not giving your kids devices till 13, or right now there's kind of a big trend towards no social media till 16, those kinds of things, and those will be hard. Those will be very difficult to figure out what those are. But I think it's kind of good to have some of those milestones. I mean, none of us really balk at the driving at 16 thing. It's a thing, right? That milestones exist in life. The R-rated movie 17 thing, that's kind of a milestone out there. Except for Passion of the Christ. But the thing is, I think our kids are different, and you guys have both alluded to that so far. We learned right away, I think we were way too strict with our son, and we actually made adjustments along the way. And I think, people always joke that if they have 5 kids, that the poor oldest kid had it the toughest and couldn't watch, Three's Company, where, the youngest kid could watch Cocaine Bear, and so it's crazy because for us, one thing that we really realized is I don't think we had equipped I wasn't doing a good job of equipping my kids to make decisions on their own. Yeah. And it's something I kind of confessed in a couple of my books that we made a change with our girls, or our younger children. And the change we made was we talked to them about the fact that, hey, right now, at age, 11 and 13, there's going to be a lot more rules. Yeah. But when you get to be 18 and the plan is, you're going to be out of the house, you're going to be in a college dorm or wherever that is, and you're going to be able to make these decisions on your own. We told them, we want you to start learning how to make some of these decisions. So we're going to give you more and more trust, and we're going to give you the opportunity to make more and more decisions. And I went as far as, and got some criticism from peers, but I said, when you are 17 for that last year, your senior year, you're going to have no rules, and you're going to have no rules. That's how far I went with it. And I basically said, that's what we're heading towards. And it was funny because at 11 and 13, they were kind of balking like, you're strict, I can't do this, I can't do that. And as soon as we told them that, they're like, oh, okay. And it was like literally no argument. That was like what they were headed towards. And my goal was that by the time they got to, why is it magically 18? Right. When they're 18, they could do whatever they want. I just said, hey, why not do it a little bit while we're there in the house.
Yep.
And what
Right.
we found, and we've talked about on this podcast before, is that they would come to us kind of like you just described, if your conversation with your son, Adam, is it would be conversations. Hey, I'm thinking of going with my friends and doing this. And we'd be like, oh, that's cool. Did you think about this? Did you think about this? You know,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to go out and we're going to be out till 3 a.m. Oh, okay, that's cool. You know, what are you going to do if a cop pulls you over and says curfew? Oh, there's a curfew? We would talk about it.
Yep.
We would literally, have conversations about these things. And we found they were coming to us more for advice and coaching because we were there in the house rather than them having to figure these things out while they're in a college dorm across the country.
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting to see it work. I honestly, I would do it again.
Yeah. I feel in some ways ill-equipped to talk about this conversation because I've been blessed with a couple of kids who are very communicative. They will talk to me a lot about things. And this wasn't intentional. But one of the things that we wound up doing as a family is we did a pretty good job with screens. We always watched TV. We always watched movies together. I don't remember a single time. Like when I was growing up, I remember watching a lot of stuff alone.
Yep.
I don't remember our kids doing that.
Three's
at all.
Company.
We would always gather together, and that sort of allowed us as parents to step into these entertainment journeys, right? If there were questions they could ask, if we wanted to say something, we could interject. If we saw that something was going in a direction that we didn't like, we could say, you know what, I just don't think we should watch this anymore.
Yeah.
And because we were always sort of there as a family, it made those conversations a lot easier to deal with. Like, I don't remember ever having like these really difficult conversations, fights over what they could watch, what they couldn't watch. Where I think it was really difficult in our family was, especially with my son, what he was listening to. The screen-based stuff we were always doing together as a family. But when it came to what he was listening to, we really didn't have any idea. And I think that did cause issues later on.
Well, and that's the world we're in now, because not only are we talking about boundaries about what our kids are or aren't engaging with, if they have devices and access, we have this whole nother conversation about how are we policing or not, how are we using parental controls or not to put those limits in place. Because I think, again, back in the day, a parent could walk into their kid's room if they weren't home and dig through a cassette pile or a CD pile and have a sense of what their child was engaging with. But now, in the internet age, I think it's harder, but I think that makes this conversation that much more important, because even if we think we're tight on the boundaries, you might be surprised, right? And I think most parents probably can look back and say, oh, I didn't have any idea they were doing X, Y, or Z. And so I don't want to be, as a parent, creating a culture of secrecy, right? Where my kids are sneaking things off. What I do want is a culture of transparency and conversation where I, as the parent, can step in and tap the brakes. And I think the squishy zone is like 14, 15, 16. Right? It's that transition between childhood, but they're not quite to young adulthood. And that's where things are a little bit gray.
Well, and one of the things we keep saying again and again, and you keep hearing the word, you probably just said it 5 times. I don't know, run it back and listen. But you said the word conversation. And this would be, I guess this would be a red flag. If we look at this in our own family, if the only time we sit down to talk with our kids is when they're in trouble or a boundary is about to happen, then something's wrong. Because one of the cool things would be is that these conversations should be about the good things as well and the fun things as well. And when we're like, hey kids, let's have a family meal, it shouldn't be like, uh-oh, what'd we do? What's wrong? It's like, hey kids, let's sit down and watch this together. Whoa, what? And I remember so many kids saying, I came home and my kids were there and like, let's talk. Uh-oh, something's wrong. And I think that we need to be talking about, and one of the concepts I've just kind of shared, one of my big things that I would totally, absolutely change in my parenting is I think I had many conversations about what not to do and not as many conversations about truth and what to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I would up my game of talking about the good stuff in life and literally being in the Word together and talking about like literally positive things. You think of the examples back again of the cooking and the working on the car in the driveway and having this so many conversations like that. That's sure every once in a while it's going to be about, hey, I like this girl. Hey, I want to go to this concert. Hey, I want to watch this movie. Hey, I'm thinking of hanging out with these guys at school. Hey, these are just conversations that should be part of life along with the, what should we cook for dinner?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I really want to maybe press into is that I think Plugged In can be a great tool for those conversations.
Yes.
I believe that there are parents out there who use Plugged In as a bit of a conversation stopper. Right? Let's look at what Plugged In says.
Oh,
if
they
Plugged
said
In
no.
says, exactly.
Except we might not have actually said no.
Well, and see, that's an interesting thing. Sometimes we get letters from parents, and I totally get this. They say, oh, my goodness, I cannot understand why you would give any points at all or anything but red to a movie that has any sort of profanity, right?
Right.
We are not really a judgmental tool. We are not meant to be sort of that moral authority that says this is wrong. By golly, this Hollywood, why are you doing this?
I just put that in the language thing in our review of this podcast.
But we are really a tool, and we want to be that help.
I'm sure kids have called us that before
my
too.
Goodness, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was just talking with someone 2 days ago, and we were just talking, and she was asking, so what do you do? And I said, well, I work for Plugged In. And she says, you are the reason I could not listen to this particular album when I was a child, right?
Yeah.
And we get that all the time, and totally understandable. We are very, very grateful that we are able to help parents make a decision. But the stories that I love are those where parents don't just go and say, let's look at Plugged In and see whether you can go or not go. I love the conversations that start with, let's go to Plugged In, read it together, and let's talk through some of the issues here.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we try to take pains to do in our movie reviews and all of our other reviews is talk about both the good and the bad. We want to give the warnings about what terrible stuff can be in this movie, but we also want to say, listen, there's some interesting messages in play here. We want this to be a catalyst for conversation and not necessarily something that stops conversation.
I think we could talk about this all day. I do want to talk a little bit longer because I think I have a little bit of a case study here. And that case study is one that lots of parents will be able to relate to, and that's Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. And my daughters are 14 and 15, and we listen to Taylor Swift. We're, fans, in quotes, of Taylor Swift. But as a parent, I am not a fan of all the content or necessarily the worldview in her music.
Which is getting more problematic.
Which has gotten more problematic. But in the conversations with my girls at this point, there are a couple songs I'm like, that one just has a ton of profanity. Can we just skip that one? But I'm still giving them the freedom to make that decision. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily saying thou shalt not. But I've tried to turn it toward, let's talk about where Taylor Swift is looking for hope and meaning. Because I think as really an avatar for our culture, you have a young woman who is desperate to find meaning and purpose in romantic relationships. And sometimes it takes a sexual turn, sometimes it takes an angry turn, but that's the through line with Taylor Swift. And I think she is representative of so much that's going on in our culture. And so instead of saying Taylor Swift's bad or Taylor Swift has a terrible worldview, I said, let's talk about what she is actually saying about romance, where she's looking for meaning, what she says about God, which increasingly is creeping in at the margins, and trying to model that critical thinking so that when my kids are listening and when they get older, they're thinking through some of those things themselves. Again, I posted something about this on my Facebook page a while back, and I had a good friend absolutely come at me and say, "You are crazy. You should not be letting your girls listen to that stuff." And I said, "Okay, let's talk about that."
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say do as I do, but I just wanted to toss that out as an example of she's ubiquitous in the culture. She's got some amazing stories. I understand why she has an appeal, and we're navigating it by talking about it.
And again, coming back to the plugged in point of all this, when I think about our role, we want to be an instrument to facilitate both of those sides of the coin,
exactly.
right? If parents say this is not right, we want to give them the information to make that decision to say yes or no.
Yep.
But we also want to give parents the ability to walk through this with their kids and teens so that they can really help teach them how to make these decisions later on their own. Use the stove that Jonathan was talking about. Learn how to drive the car responsibly. Always be there to talk. Always be there to answer questions. I think that's the most important thing.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's a good place to end our conversation here today, at least this part of it, but we don't want to end the conversation with you. What do you think? What did your parents do with you in this area? How are you helping your kids navigate? Where are you giving them freedom, or maybe even with a bit of trepidation, letting them make their own choices? And what are the hard no's? We would love to hear from you, and you can let us know at team@thepluggedinshow.com. Just shoot us an email and tell us your story. Or you can go to the homepage for thepluggedinshow.com and leave us a voicemail. There's a little tab there you can click, and it'll prompt you through how you can leave us a message, and we might even use a snippet of that on a future show. Thanks, guys. Well, in our second segment today, I am reluctantly going to hand the reins of power
I know you like your control.
over to Mr. Paul Asay, and Paul, you can tell us why I'm doing that.
Why, thank you. Yes, we are going to be talking about one Chapell Roan.
Chapell Roan.
And I know very little about Chapell Roan other than she has a really fantastic name, and she's been blowing up everywhere. And she recently just canceled a bunch of concerts.
She did.
And she seems like she has some sort of a love-hate relationship with some of her fans. Would that be fair to say?
That is all fair to say.
So tell me a little bit, tell me what kind of music she actually does. I know she's a huge deal, but I've never heard of music.
So her real name is Kaylee Rose Amstutz. And so apparently she didn't like that name. So one day she renamed herself Chapell Roan. And I confess I don't know what the story on that name is. So I'll need to dig a bit deeper on that. But she is someone who reminds me almost of a mashup or splitting the difference between Lady Gaga and Miley Cyrus.
Oh, interesting.
She is very flamboyant and theatrical. She wears crazy costumes and has an all-female band and just very colorful and lots of makeup. So in that sense, she reminds me of Lady Gaga, early Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga is now in her acting phase, but but before she was dressing up as Kermit the Frog. She was dressing up in a meat dress. I don't know that Chapell Roan's done a meat dress yet, but the first time I saw a video of her, I'm like, oh, this is sort of got that Lady Gaga thing going on. But she's got a deeper, almost a husky voice that reminds me a little bit of Miley Cyrus. And all of that will layer over a very 80s kind of vibe. Like, I hear her stuff, I'm like, oh.
Takes you back to your childhood?
This could have been 1986, 87, easily. One of her biggest songs the last year has been Hot to Go. And, it's one of these songs that's like an earworm song. Like, it was around 5 minutes, and then I think it was in a Target commercial. Right? It used to be that musicians prided themselves by not selling out. And now musicians sell out the very first second they can possibly do it. Well,
that's even very 80s, right?
It is. So I would say she is a couple things you need to know about her. She grew up in a very conservative Christian home that emphasized modesty. And at some point, she kind of had a full rebellion against that. It probably won't come as a huge surprise that she now identifies as gay, and she sings about, same-sex relationships with other women in her music. It's not like all over it, but if you're listening, you'll be like, oh yeah, she's singing about romance with a woman. And I think because her songs are so catchy and because they're these kind of rapid fire lyrics, it's a little bit, again, like the 80s where like 30 years later you wake up and you're like, wait,
well, I know what that song was about.
That's what they were singing about.
Yeah.
And so a bit of profanity creeps in there. And I think that's what we need to know just in terms of content. But I think she is emblematic of so much of what's going on in the culture right now. She's blown up so fast and her fan base has expanded so rapidly that I think she's still trying to even assimilate what it means to deal with that fame. And she has talked about her mental health issues. She's talked about being bipolar, and that she's only recently sort of coming to grips with her own mental health stuff and how her fandom interacts with that. Well, and it's complicated.
You do hear so often. I mean, it's sort of like this entertainment trope, right? You become so famous so fast, but in today's culture with social media and the speed with which things spread, I mean, it can just, I'd never even heard about her. And then all of a sudden, this was really sort of the summer of Chapell Roan.
Yeah, it totally has been. And as you mentioned, she has canceled some concerts. And, as a musician, you don't want to cancel a concert unless you absolutely have to.
Right.
And there has been some conversation and some criticism that she has done that too casually. And she's alienated some of those fans. And then she's got like the crazy stalker fans that are trying to figure out where she's at and saying really inappropriate things. And she has talked about how that's affected her mental health and how difficult that has been for her to navigate. And I think one of the things that we lose track of sometimes when we talk about these people, even as critics and as people engage with the culture, we can kind of objectify them too, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that just reading through some of her mental health struggles, it's like, okay, this is a real person, right? And but she's also a real person that has embraced a worldview that is at odds with a Christian perspective, and I think we've got to pay attention to that too.
It's fascinating when you really dig into some of these stories, because you're right in terms of objectifying people. I think sometimes fans can say, oh, she's great and there's nothing wrong that she can do.
Yep.
We can look at her and look at some of, her outlook on life and say, oh, she's terrible, don't listen to her.
Right.
These real people are real complex.
They're real complex, and there's a lot of, it's not over the top explicit stuff, but certainly there's a sexual undercurrent there, and some of her fans have responded to her that way as well. And again, she hasn't really liked that.
Right.
And it's like, well, when you sing about these things, people are probably going to relate to you that way.
It's true.
And I think she is really navigating all of that right now, and unless she has a breakdown and burns out, which I'm not hoping for her, she's going to keep navigating these things too, and I think she's somebody who could be here to stay for a while.
Yeah. Well, you've written a great review on Chapell Roan and some of her recent work, so be sure to go to the website and check that out.
All right.
Thanks so much, Adam. Really appreciate it.
Well, now it's time for a fun part of the show that we call Pop Culture Connection, wherein we are joined by our producer, Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Adam.
And Ashley has, well, as the title says, pop culture questions that we are going to connect with. She asks us questions, and our goal is to give as many answers as possible.
Yeah.
And it's fun. We love it.
It is,
And, well, I love it.
It is fun when our coworkers aren't heckling us during our.
I don't know what you're talking about, Jonathan.
Is that Paul or me?
Don't know what you're talking about.
All right,
Spider-Man,
Ashley.
lawnmower
Take it away.
So
Stop
since we
it.
had kind
Stop
of a
it.
broad conversation about entertainment,
Yes.
I went with movie genres.
Okay, good.
So, Jonathan, do you prefer
please.
action flicks or rom-coms?
I prefer rom-com because I like my wife, and they make me laugh.
That's dumb,
and they make
Jonathan.
her laugh. And happy wife, happy life. But comedy is always a good thing. But let's be honest, a little romance is always good as well. The dialogue sometimes is a little better than those action films. Let's say the acting is honestly a little bit better as well. You got some creative writing. Some of it's actually been shot well because they want to, capture that move versus an action film. Let's get the action,
Nice.
Jonathan, that was impressive.
Nice.
All wrong, but
Paul,
impressive.
Ashley is the judge, not you.
I got 8 points, Jonathan.
I
Good
love
job,
it.
Nice job.
Jonathan.
Good job,
Good
I'll take it.
Jonathan.
Yay.
I'll take the low-hanging fruit.
All right.
Who's next?
Paul.
Paul's
All right.
the next victim
All right.
on The Price is Right.
Animated or horror movies?
Oh my goodness, this is really tough. I'm going to go animated movies because they are very sweet sometimes. Wild Robot is on my brain right now. They have really deep messages. The artistry can be beautiful. I love voice actors. Voice actors are amazing, really. The music tends to be better. It's a movie that you can watch together as a family, and I'm all about being together as a family. Some of my favorite movies of all time have been these animated movies.
Yes.
You love voice actors?
I do. No,
That's a good one.
seriously. Look at these voice actors. They are amazing. I watched this whole documentary on voice actors and all the different voices that these people could just pull out of the air. It's just incredible. Even when I listen to you, Adam, doing your really terrible accents.
I don't really feel affirmed by that.
Yeah.
All right, Pinocchio.
But I think to myself, that was really bad, and yet I cannot do anything close to that.
That's right.
Well,
Do
nice
Chewbacca.
job.
Do Chewbacca. My Chewbacca goes.
Your Chewbacca sounds like somebody's choking to death.
Wow. Wow. 8 points. You and Jonathan are tied.
Man, I don't know that I'm going to be
Take
able to get
that,
many.
Jonathan.
Oh, I don't know.
We shall see. What do you got for me?
All right, Adam. Westerns or sci-fi?
Oh, sci-fi. Sci-fi has spaceships like the Millennium Falcon. Sci-fi has lasers. It has explosions. Sci-fi has, alien creatures. Sci-fi often has lightsabers. I mean, good sci-fi does. And hyperspace. There's no hyperspace in Westerns. It has planets. It has guys in red shirts that die. You know by what they're wearing whether they're going to die or not. You have really egotistical men who think they have it all figured out, who never submitted to the no-win situation. Thank you very
Sounds like
much.
some Westerns I've seen, too, though.
It's true. It's
okay.
true.
Nice. 10 points.
Good job.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
All right.
So that's a very nice way. This is going to be, you will be on the podcast plenty later, but this is
I
the
will.
last time you will be on the podcast actually as a resident of Colorado Springs. So it's nice that you were able to win.
Yes, I am in the process of moving to California, but we'll talk more about that on a future podcast.
Maybe.
Maybe. Or
Who
maybe
knows?
or maybe not.
Who knows? We should do like a pop culture connection on the 30 seconds to talk about all the good things that Adam has brought to this podcast.
Oh,
That would
Paul.
be nice.
Now I feel bad about being snarky with you earlier. See, you go all softy on me. I'm like, aw. Well, we like talking with each other, and we hope that you enjoy being a part of that conversation as well. And we would love to hear from you. What do you think about trying to protect our kids today and giving them freedom? You can let us know by shooting us an email at team@thepluggedinshow.com. You can also get in touch with us on Facebook and Instagram, and we would love to just connect with you. And again, if you're watching or listening on YouTube today, please like, comment, and subscribe so that we can stay connected with you in the future. And for that matter, what did you think about our conversation about Chapell Roan? Are your kids listening to Hot to Go so much that it's making you crazy? Because I confess we have had a little bit of that in our family.
And you know how to spell it.
Exactly. Boy, howdy do I. And if you know, you know.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And of course, we would also encourage you to leave a review of The Plugged In Show wherever you get your podcasts. That will help other people know what to expect, and that really helps us out as well. And finally, one last thing. If you haven't done so yet, and why haven't you, we would love to give you a copy of Becoming a Screen Savvy Family. These are the kind of conversations that we have in our book, and we want to help you. We want to put the proverbial or the metaphorical arm around you and just walk through these hard things that we face as we're helping our kids navigate the realm of entertainment and technology. And today, for a gift of any amount, you can get a copy of that book, and you'll find information on how to do that in the episode notes for today's show. Well, thanks again for spending some time with us on the Plugged In Show this week. There's all sorts of things you could be doing with your time, more every day, it seems like. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to joining you for another conversation next week on the Plugged In Show.